Okay, so as you can probably tell if you have a slightly trained eye, this is a mid-motor Team Losi XX chassis. I ended up getting two Losi XXs. This was the first XX that I bought, and I made a video on this some time ago when I purchased it. And then I found another XX, a XX CR actually, that I thought was that had a few more nice pieces to it, so I figured I'd pick that one up and make that like a rear motor runner. I wasn't quite sure what to do with this, so I figured, well, fuck it. Let's try to make a mid-motor XX. I tried looking up whether anyone has done this before, and it doesn't seem like they have, or at least it hasn't really been documented. So I figured I could show you what my thought process is for doing this. Now, first and foremost, if you're going to do this, it's going to take a bit of dremeling, and you are going to have to sacrifice some parts for this. And by parts, I mean your chassis and your motor plate, okay? If you're willing to do that, then I'll show you what I did. Basically, the idea is to take the gearbox, the whole gearbox assembly, and just flip it around. And in some ways, this is actually pretty convenient because the way that this pivot block is set up, the way these holes are aligned, is that you can take this gearbox and mount it one way or the other, and the gearbox mounting holes will line up here. Normally they go here, and then the bulkhead will just go in the other position. And the holes are the same spacing and everything, so I could either have a rear motor configuration with the bulkhead up here and the gearbox mounted back here, or I could have a mid motor configuration with the bulkhead back here and the gearbox mounted up here. Now, in order to do that, I need to make space here. Okay, so normally in the XX chassis, you have this brace that goes across, which is part of where the battery slots under when you mount the battery. So you have to cut that off. But on top of that, there's pieces on the side that you have to cut down because you need to make space for the motor to fit in this way. And you also need to make space on this side for the motor output shaft to not get sort of stuck on this part here where that brace mounts over. So you have to cut all of that down. On this side, I cut it down to the level of the chassis. Okay, I should probably cut this little piece off too. I kept it on for some dumb reason. And then on this side, you just cut it down to here, which is basically the level of this lip here on the chassis. So on this side, down to the bottom. On this side, down to the lip. Okay? And then once you're done doing that, the screw, there's 4 screws here on the back side that mount this pivot block. Okay? This screw right here. So that would be the right front screw. Okay? That one, you're going to need to shave it down because you need that to be level with the chassis so that the motor can actually fit in here. It is a tight fit, and if this screw is protruding up, it's going to prevent the motor from fitting properly. Okay, so that's step 1, cutting all this out. Step 2 is cutting the motor mount itself. Normally, the motor mount has this extra piece here, and if you keep this on, it's not going to fit inside this alley here where you normally mount the battery. So you have to cut this piece off. Okay? So that's one piece you have to cut. And it's kind of easy to identify because on the XX motor mount, on the bottom here, there's like almost a separation between this outer portion and this inner portion here. So you just cut along that line all the way up, and you cut this out. So that's number 1. Number 2 is you have to cut a little bit of material out along the side here on the bottom because this needs to fit in here. When it's in rear motor configuration, that this uncut piece, the stock motor mount, fits here just fine because there's nothing blocking it on the sides. When you mount it as a mid-motor configuration, you have these 2 walls here that are confining the motor plate. So you have to cut out enough material so it all fits in there, okay? But once you do, look at that. It slots right in. See, the motor fits. Again, it's a little tight, okay? but it just barely, let's see if I can get some better lighting in here. The motor just barely clears the bottom of the chassis. And technically, you know, these side portions are not the bottom of the chassis. The lowest point on the chassis for the battery mounts. And it kicks up a little bit here, but it just barely clears that. Look at that. So it actually fits. And then on this side here, right, the spur gear clears the battery tunnel, if you will. So you don't have to do anything here to the spur and slipper assembly. This clears just fine. And you need enough, you know, again, see, I had to cut this down so that the motor output shaft is not protruded by it, or blocked by it, I should say. So this can come out. Then when you mount your pinion, you mount it with the pinion gear facing in and the grub screw facing out, and you should be able to clear this no problem. The only issue, if I could really mention anything, would be this screw on the bottom here where the motor mounts onto the motor plate. If you need to adjust your mesh, maybe you'll need like a ball-ended hex driver to get in here, because that's kind of a tight fit. See, if I make the camera level with the chassis, I don't have a clear shot to that screw. So maybe you can get in there at an angle, and it's not too big of a deal. What was that? I used a 1.5 millimeter. It kind of works, but you really need a ball end. So one thing you could do is just, you know, take this assembly out and adjust the mesh with this gearbox out. Then once the mesh is adjusted properly, you just plop this whole thing back in, and you're good to go. Okay? And then once you have that set up, it should be pretty easy to do the rest of this, right? This bulkhead just goes straight onto the back, all right? And then you mount your arms and everything. So this allows you to run a mid-motor configuration on your XX without having to change the wheelbase of the car. My friend Dwayne, who's really into Losis, hello Dwayne if you're listening, he had a different idea about basically changing the pivot block so that you can flip the gearbox around, but in doing so it pushes everything back and you get a longer wheelbase. If you have a Dremel and you're brave enough to do this, you do enough cutting, you can make this fit. I haven't actually done anything else to this, but it looks like, you know, a shorty pack would fit perfectly fine in here. This battery tunnel is super long anyway, as it is on other rear motor cars like the RC10. So if I just get shorty pack, right, slots right in, plenty of room. You can put some foam spacers here if you want to, you know, keep the heat out or something, or isolate the battery from the motor heat, but I don't think that'll be a huge issue. Basically, this motor plate here is like your waterfall. So that works perfectly fine. So anyway, I figured I'd share this with you guys. If you're curious about doing something new and innovative with your XX, here you go. I do plan to finish this up and have it as a runner, not for this year's Vonats, because I have other cars I want to run at Vonats, but I'm thinking next year I'm going to run this. This should be a lot of fun. And if you're a rear motor purist, or a Losi purist that believes I just butchered my car, I'll give you a fork so you can eat my ass. In the meantime, thanks for watching.